Darkly Splendid Abodes, the official podcast of Toronto Thelema, exploring, if you will, practical philosophy, from science and the workings of the mind to spirituality, esotericism, and magic. Stooping down, dipping my wings, I came into the darkly splendid abodes. Patricia Crowther is hailed as one of the mothers of modern witchcraft. Initiated by Gerald Gardner and taking the craft name of Thelema, she went on to be a key promoter of Wicca and defender of the practice of witchcraft. We'll learn more about this icon as Rosemary Stehlik and I resume our study of women of the occult.
Let's go and join Pat Crowther again. She's going to show us an occultist ceremony. She's outside. Let's have a look at this.
I invoke thee and call upon thee, O mighty mother of us all, bringer of all fruitfulness, by seed and root, by stem and bud, by leaf and flower and fruit, by life and love, do we invoke thee. Holiest receiver, deign to bless and to consecrate this wine of life. So mote it be.
So mote it be. To the old ones, merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. From me to thee, so mote it be.
To the old ones, merry meet and merry part, and merry meet again.
Here we go. Right, we're back. That was Patricia blessing the wine. I don't suppose you have anything to say about that, really, Michael, do you?
I'm a bit horrified by that.
You are a bit horrified about that. We can take some more calls.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's Patricia Crowther going on to the James Whale show. James Whale, that's not James Whale, I should warn listeners. This is not James Whale, the genius who gave us not only Frankenstein, but more importantly, The Bride of Frankenstein, which is one of the greatest movies of all time. No, this is James Whale, the radio show host in England.
With this particular clip being taken from a series of interviews that happened in the 1980s with Patricia Crowther.
Yeah, basically we've got the satanic panic period going on. So
correct, yes.
In full steam. Well, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law.
Love is the law, love under will.
Welcome back, Rosemary.
Thank you for having me again.
It's good to have you return from your journeys abroad.
Yes, indeed. It's been a bit of a hiatus for us in this series of covering women of the occult, but it's a very auspicious return following my early to mid-September sojourn into the ancient lands of Kemet, Egypt, and to be touching the current directly of the ancient gods and goddesses that we revere so deeply. So it's actually quite appropriate to have a segue into yet another high priestess that is connected to those sacred portals of deity.
And this is a priestess who is an avid supporter of what is now known as Wicca. And I don't know that it was when she first joined it. I don't. Maybe it was.
Well, we are going to get into that.
Yeah.
We're going to get into the details of her extremely auspicious connections back to the rebirth of modern witchcraft that is linked, of course, to Gerald Gardner in
and
England.
she calls it the craft.
Correct. Yes.
Looking forward to this. This is kind of the big reason I'm looking forward to this is because I don't really know anything about this priestess of ours.
She's quite a stellar force of nature. Just to backtrack a little bit, she is one of a triad of high priestesses that we, at this time of existence, refer to as the mothers of modern witchcraft, which include Eleanor Bone, Doreen Valiente, as well as Patricia Crowther, and they all have connections to Gerald Gardner. For those of you that are not familiar with Dr. Gerald Brousseau Gardner, he was an extremely eccentric and unique figure in the contemporary rebirth of witchcraft. We won't go too much into him because we want to make sure we focus on Patricia, but he's an extremely important link for Patricia to the religion as it was reborn in England after the repealing of the Witchcraft Act in 1951. So remember, when Gerald was doing his intense journey of connecting to the craft of the wise, he was doing it under the umbrella of a time where it was still considered illegal to practice certain arts of magic in England. And it also predated the Second World War, but we'll get into those kind of things as we move on.
Yeah, it's funny, I forget about that when, because, I'm so used to thinking of things Crowleyan, all the things about Aleister Crowley, and you're right, like at that time it was still, we still had those laws in place.
And of course, legend is such that we at this point in history know that both Gerald Gardner and Aleister Crowley were in connection with each other. And they were, for lack of a better word, striving to manifest a magical path that involved joined forces between Thelema and the rebirth of modern witchcraft. Now, that did not come to pass. However, that was something that was in the works between their correspondences. And we will learn later on that the future husband of Patricia Crowther was an extremely close friend of Gerald Gardner. So that's what her gateway was to his world. It's extremely fascinating. So we'll go right back to her beginnings to see the magic unfold of her contributions to modern witchcraft.
Is it true that she was born during a storm?
Isn't that wild? I was going to bring that up because, as you know, we left off with Rosalie Norton, who, of course, is also a Libra, of course. Patricia Crowther is also a Libra, who was also born on the night of a storm. Well, to be exact, at 12:30 a.m. on October 14th, 1927. So there's this sort of continuing dovetailing of our topics from one figure being featured to the next, which I find really fascinating.
Yeah.
And just to backtrack a little bit, Patricia was born to Claire and Alfred Dawson in Sheffield, which is a sort of industrialized, hardworking part of northern England.
Just like many a heavy metal band.
Yeah. Double horns being thrown as we say that. So yeah, for anyone that really wants to dive more into her life, there are some extremely inspiring YouTube videos that you can peruse. Some of the information that you will hear from me today is drawn from a 17-minute video produced by, I believe the gentleman's name was Terry Sly, if I'm not mistaken, but he had some pretty excellent information. So I pretty much took point forms of his mini documentary outside of other sources of research that I've been aware of with regards to Patricia since I was 21. So I've been studying her for a long time. But to get back to her birth, as you said, like Rosalie Norton, she was born to a thunderstorm. I find it interesting that it's been raining all day once again. So, the Dawsons, who are her parents, they lived next to a woman who made a living as a palm reader. She was clairvoyant. Her name was Madame Melba. And she had a very, almost like for the time, a very sort of, what's the word I'm looking, bold. A very bold outness with her practice. She had this giant window that had this massive palm, a poster of a palm on it, facing out into the public, with all of this sort of like astrological and symbolic magic insignia and all over the hand and representing the powers of the hand as a palm reader. all the planetary and esoteric sigils, so to speak. And the Dawsons, Patricia's parents, did, I don't know how they were exposed to this, but they did hear a prophecy that Madame Melba felt compelled to tell them, that the daughter that they had just given birth to was going to be very famous in the future, and that she would have a significant impact on the public, and that her life was going to be very intensely influenced by the moon to such an extent that this child herself will be a fortune teller and a clairvoyant and a seer, and will have an impact on the world thusly. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. It's always nice to have that said about you ahead of time.
Yeah, it's kind of like, yeah, it's inspiring. I'm sure the parents were just tickled.
Good.
That's great. So yeah, this child, this young Patricia, was extremely shy, very artistic, and had a penchant for dressing up as a fairy and kind of prancing through the garden, and just, very high level of imagination.
I'm waiting for this to diverge from Rosaline Norton.
I know. It's fascinating because their lives are very parallel. There's a lot of parallels going on. And during one sort of kids' party, there are photographs of Patricia as said fairy being sat on a crescent moon and whirled around by the children as sort of like the crowned fairy of the moon at a very, very young age. Despite this, the shyness prevailed, so her mother felt compelled to enroll Patricia into ballet, into dance class, to try to get her out of her intensely cerebral shyness and inner state of being. And
what better way to do so than in the hall of the Fairy King?
Right?
Well, that's the Mountain King, I guess, but yeah.
Absolutely, yes. Midsummer Night's Dream. But there was a prestigious ballet school called the Grant School of Dance, and Patricia was enrolled in that, and she successfully navigated the various initiations and grades and so on, and successfully graduated as a ballet dancer, completing all of her tests and all of her initiations, to the extent where she was given the lead role in a ballet performance at the Empire Theatre in Sheffield, where she got to play the starring role as a child. So it's kind of like therapy through learn to swim by throwing the child into the deep end sort of thing. But she navigated that quite successfully, and I think it was the seed that needed to be planted for her future career in entertainment, which prevailed through the ages. Now remember, this happened just before the outbreak of World War II. And when that did happen, all of the experience she had in theater continued forth, and she did take on the profession of theater performer. There was a pantomime performance of Aladdin in which she plays something that's called a tiller girl. I'm not quite sure what that is.
Oh, you remind me. I wanted to look that up.
I don't know what that is. The bottom line is her career in theater was continuous, and it diversified as she grew older. So not only was she dancing and performing in the various theaters throughout Sheffield, like the Lyceum Theatre, she also went on to become a piano player. So she would do performances, musicians' roles in theater productions, etc.
And I guess this would have been early 40s?
Yeah, so this is now, the Second World War is raging. I guess during this time, there were a lot of matinees through the theater that were serving the purpose of entertaining children. And she did play piano for a lot of these things. Like one she did like an audition for some head honcho at the BBC, for example. I can't remember. His name was Barney Coleham or something like that. And she
really popular at the time. If you were around, you would.
right. Apparently, like he was the bomb.
Yeah.
No World
like
War.
Ed Sullivan of the early 40s.
I guess so. Yes. Well said. And he was the host of a program called. Well, he produced a program called Let's Have a Go. Who was hosted by someone who referred to themselves as Wilfred Pickles.
Let's have a go. That's like such a British
I know.
wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Yeah.
Bob's your uncle.
Yeah. Know what I mean?
Know what I mean? Know what I mean? I'd like some Prem. I'm sorry, I'll stop.
So yeah, this went on. This went on for a while. So she was very comfortable in theater. And of course, this is more her outward vocational calling. In the meantime, she had a very private pursuit of educating herself when it came to the ancient mythologies of Greece. And so she was very private about that. She was seeking the continuing presence of a mother figure in her life. So she found comfort in representations of the Great Mother and the goddess of the moon, whose daughter she felt she was, sort of thing. So I find that really enchanting.
Yeah, I was listening to a YouTube video of, there's a bunch of these invocations, I think they are, of the various different signs of the zodiac.
Oh yes, we'll get into that.
Yeah.
She, and this is what's so great about her and her husband. Well, we're coming up to that. That's a great segue. It's around this time with this, Wilfred Pickles deal that she meets her future husband, Arnold Crowther, who apparently he was playing as a performer a summer session at the Shanklin Isle of Wight.
Now this man, it was a magician.
Yes,
but...
not in the Crowleyan sense, of course. He was like
the sleight of hand stage performer magician.
Yes, he was a puppeteer, a ventriloquist, a pull the rabbit out of the top hat kind of gent.
One day I wish to be referred to as a pull the rabbit out of the top hat kind of gent.
What a skill. With all due respect, though, no disrespect to the theater performers who are magicians out there, it does take a very cunning and clever person to be that swift.
And charming.
Yeah, that's right. And he had his whole thing, the cape, the cane, the whole thing. And he also performed for children's matinees. And that's where their world came together, because she would be playing the piano while he's doing his thing. Beautiful. And then lo and behold, before you knew it, in the same place, in this particular place they were working in, they came to get to know each other better, so to speak. Would have been around 1956.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Around there. So... they were floating around each other's orbits.
So Patricia was born in 1927, Era Vulgaris, and she died sometime after this podcast has been recorded, because she's still alive, for God's sake.
She is alive.
Well, at least I see no evidence online that
she's still alive.
Yeah.
Yes.
Has yet to relinquish the mortal coil.
Yes, she's still as fiery as ever, promoting education in relation to the craft of the wise.
Now, I don't want to jinx it, of course, because when we mentioned Kenneth Anger...
Oh, no!
Unfortunately.
Let's take this out of the law. We take this out of the law thrice. So there she is, having her dalliances with her future husband. And he's considerably older than her. He does kind of take on a very powerful role in her life insofar as I mentioned earlier, becoming the gateway through which Patricia comes to meet Gerald Gardner. Now, Gerald had a continuing museum of witchcraft operating on the Isle of Man. He was connected to his high priestess at the time, Doreen Valiente, who is responsible for penning charge of the goddess, which of course also goes back to the Gospel of Aradia text that Charles Godfrey Lalande claims was given to him by a fortune teller in the Black Forest. So there are these wild, like passing of the batons at high speed from one generation to the next, with this urgency that makes you feel the force of nature that the craft of the wise was striving to become reborn into the consciousness of the 20th century. And of course, there's that notorious legend that Gerald and his coven at the time, this is before Patricia, of course, were responsible for invoking a ritual to prevent the Nazi forces from coming across into England, to invade England.
We touched on that a little bit when we were talking about Dion Fortune and Aleister Crowley.
Absolutely. And so, yes, that did happen, and some members of that coven did pass away as a result of that working. So you get this sort of like the old guard that is resurrecting the ancient pre-Christian animistic religion of the land, you know, colliding with this new fresh wave of people like the Patricia Crowthers and Arnold Crowthers of the world, and bringing the craft of the wise back into consciousness as the Witchcraft Act is repealed in England. So the timing is fortuitous, very fortuitous. And Gerald, he was a profound author in his own right in setting in motion proper educational materials for people to follow the true craft. But the kind of branding with the word Wicca is what separates the Gardnerian witchcraft from others that claim, well, my family has been practicing this pre-Gardner since the dawn of time. You know, so you get that whole sort of battle that happened in the 60s and 70s, and people trying to like vie for agency of who's more legitimate than whom, and the whole sort of like that battle.
Can't avoid it.
Yeah. So, but Patricia was very single-minded in her mission. And so there you have it. You have Arnold introducing her. And by 1960, well, just before this, Gerald Gardner does end up personally initiating Patricia in his private cottage on the Isle of Man as high priestess of Gardnerian witchcraft. And with that comes Gerald Gardner officiating the wedding or handfasting of Arnold and Patricia. So they then ascend and rise by 1961 as the first official Gardnerian coven of Sheffield, England. So therein lies the whole sort of like...
That's the crux of
the explosion into, you know, we never left, and we are vocal once again.
It's interesting to see this, as you say, this passing of the baton going on. We already witnessed it in the form of an encounter, for instance, in England of Lady Frida Harris and Kenneth Anger.
The notorious meeting of the minds under the umbrella of...
and browbeating of the minds.
Right. Heavily so.
Yeah. So it's funny to see how the Americans were kind of what was going on, at least with the Thelemites in America. I don't know about any other groups or anything like that.
Well, it's interesting because by this point, of course, now you get this, you have the subsiding of the Second World War, which still has its reverberations, hence the continuous paranoia around the devil and, you know,
the Red Devil.
These are not witches, they are devil worshippers with their evil connection to the hoofed and horned one.
Or communists, if that doesn't work.
Well, yeah, there you go, right? So you see that ambiance, or I would rather say miasma, to be honest, permeating the legitimate, authentic, grounded voice of the occult, striving to present sound, highly sophisticated educational materials to the public so that people are not led astray by all of these sort of like hooligans and all this tomfoolery around the subject.
It's interesting to see how that same climate and atmosphere came right back around,
Yes,
probably
it
many
did.
times in between even, but in that opening clip that we had taking place in the 80s.
Yes, so, I mean, and that, it's why I felt that was such an important clip for us to present, because now, I mean, we will backtrack a little bit, but just to touch upon that, it is the continuous path that Patricia was on ever since her initiation. And many people were initiated under Arnold and Patricia Crowther from the moment they were initiated by Gerald Gardner, who is, of course, the profound catalyst, the profound mercurial catalyst of the rebirth of witchcraft. Now, so here we are in the 60s, and they are doing their thing. They are, being initiated. They are finding themselves comfortably segueing into the 60s counterculture movement. And there they are doing their natural craft of the wise, promoting a return to the land and seeing the earth as our mother and as a conscious, sentient entity of sacredness that we must revere and protect. And so their presence was very resonant with the 60s. By 1961, as I mentioned, they did officially have their coven operating. And this went on to open the gateway for a series of materials that they wrote. Patricia and Arnold Crowther wrote several books together, such as the wonderfully titled Lit Off the Cauldron, which had like a foreword in the beginning by Dr. Leo Louis Martello, who is a very mysterious man to me that I've been fascinated by over the years. He was an out gay Sicilian high priest of the sort of the Strega tradition.
Oh, yeah.
And he was very vocal in Salem. He was one of the first to set up the Anti-Defamation League style occult movement in the U.S. So here's where it's starting to have like it's coming across the pond. And he was very instrumental in just breaking up misconceptions about witchcraft. In Salem, of all places.
Yeah.
If we think back to the legacy of Salem and what that implies, he had his work cut out for him intensely. Now, so this profound, wonderful Lit Off the Cauldron book is kind of like a Witchcraft 101 through the lens of Gardnerian witchcraft for the world to experience, the 8 high sacred points of the year that witches observe, talking about initiations. Now, this was it was still kind of edgy to do this at the time because there were a lot of people thinking, you've sworn secrecy to the ancient vows. Like, this isn't the internet age where everyone's posting their altar, This was like a grievance a lot of traditional witches had with people that were more public. But how fortunate we are that we had people being public, because who knows what would have happened to a lot of this
even
wisdom.
now, with the internet, I mean, I want to say even now with the internet, we have so much ignorance surrounding subjects. And it's almost like even now, because of the internet, we have, it contributes its own massive...
It's created even more smoke and mirrors in some ways with, everyone and their dog. So here they are writing all these beautiful, clear, concise manuals. Everything from books on witchcraft and astrology to another book that I love the title of Witch Blood. They're just talking about their lives as the high priest and high priestess of their Sheffield coven and bringing to the world the teachings that Gerald Gardner brought to them. Simultaneously also, one of the major components of bringing the craft to North America was through Raymond Buckland. But that's a whole other world of transference, so to speak. And he's also someone who was an English Romani witch. So he brought the Romani and Gardnerian witchcraft principles together, which is fascinating because there's a lot of legend about traditional witches in New Forest. Is it New Forest in England? And Romani people in England kind of, holding council and just hanging out and exchanging ideas. And
Cool.
yeah, so, but to backtrack, so there you have all these books being written, the educational things, the speaking, and then in 1971, so this is 10 years on, Patricia and Arnold Crowther write and present something that gets broadcasted on the BBC radio known as A Spell of Witchcraft. And this is what you were referring to earlier about the sort of radio presence that Patricia starts to have, such as the series of astrology dealing with moving through the 12 houses of the zodiac. And she has invocations dedicated to each sign in the zodiac. Invocation to Aries, invocation to, Taurus, invocation to Gemini, and so on. But in this Spell of Witchcraft broadcast, there was there were 20-minute segments, educational segments, and I think there were about 20 of them, with each of them having this really dramatic musical introduction. But in this podcast, it was very much just the continuing of what they were speaking about in their written works. So the power of media, the power of the written word, the power of physical presence, embodiment, teaching was a very strong tool in their sort of power couple.
Yeah,
arsenal.
I mean, the radio was, what we would have had for the equivalent to the internet at the time, really.
That is correct. Yeah.
So that's pretty cool, to have something like that represented in a positive way, or in a useful and intelligible way.
So you have the written word graduating to radio and then later graduating to television, because they did television, as the 1980s interview there with the wonderful James Whale.
Wonderful in scare quotes.
He has this one sort of documentary that he hosts that I would really recommend people to see, and it's called The Weird World of Witchcraft. And he goes and interviews a shopkeeper in one of these occult shops in Britain at the time. And it is utterly charming. It is a riot to watch because he is so English in his choice of words and how he conducts the interview, I just find myself completely enchanted by these innocent and somewhat dated presentations, but thank goodness they exist.
Yeah.
Right?
Makes me think of some of those talk shows from the 90s where
very much like that. The scandalous world of the witches dancing with the goat.
So you feel that it's a good thing to drink people's blood?
Yeah, it's just all that sensationalism.
Yeah.
Which of course is sheer nonsense, but it had a genuine impact on very intensely devout religious people that had a lot of paranoia about the satanic panic waves going through the world. Of course, it's all the more reason, almost like homeopathy, that it was great that you had the Patricias of the world speaking to counteract that kind of sensationalism through the media.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to have somebody who's level-headedly representing it. I mean, I don't know if she was on the defensive as much in the earlier days, or maybe more so, especially with the repealment of the witch laws and the genesis of The Exorcist.
Right. Well, see, there you go. And what I find interesting, too, is that I would suspect that in her latter years, she would grow a little more sort of feisty with this because of the decades worth of having to deal with the same statements over and over again from people that are supposed to have responsible roles of leadership in relation to public relations and religion. And so if you see on that James Whale show, that little clip that we had the intro for, at the very end, it's the deacon that's like, oh, a priest is consecrating the chalice of wine. How horrifying. You know, just kind of this sort of denigrating energy.
And it's funny that, like you say, it's like having to deal with the same questions and the same comments constantly. I was watching an interview from the 80s with Clive Barker.
Okay.
I think it was today, actually. But I'm surprised he was able to stay calm and actually just keep answering in a very jovial kind of way, because there was like a crowd of people and everybody who was given a chance to ask a question and it was almost like you were just getting the same question over and
you're just
over.
waiting for that gauntlet to drop, that same
and
gauntlet.
It's like, oh, didn't you just listen to the last? You're still,
Well, you actually had set up a little portion where Patricia does have to deal. Now, as a precursor to this next soundbite that we will share with the audience, do keep in mind, it is a very dated interview. There are still divisions made between what white witchcraft is and what black witchcraft is. We all understand that these are illusory divisions, but these were the kind of things that were battled back then. This sort of dichotomy battle. Are you a good witch or are you a bad witch? Well, clearly, a witch is a witch is a witch. How people utilize their magic is in the true path of the craft, of witchcraft, is in alignment with their higher divine self. And anyone that abuses things like that, there are delusions going on in that person's practice.
Yeah.
So, and she speaks very candidly about that kind of thing to protect the sanctity of witchcraft in the public eye.
Yeah, let's give that a listen.
We'll get stuck into it. Are you a black witch or a white witch? Is there a distinction or not?
No, they're only white witches, because if you're initiated, you are a white witch, and there's only one way to get into the craft, and that is to be initiated.
So what are black witches? I mean, these people who are supposed to be bad and evil.
Well, I don't know who they are, but they're just people who use the craft, use the name of the craft, call themselves witches, you see. And they're nothing to do with it, really.
Okay, right. Thank you, John. That's answered, hopefully, you. Chris.
Yeah, and it's funny.
So there you go, right? You hear that? She's very feisty. I love her fire.
Yeah. And you can tell she's a little, it's just this bombardment of these, why should she have to answer for something that's nothing to do with her?
Absolutely. It's like somebody just picking some random practice from the other side of the world and asking you to be accountable for that. And it's like, I don't even know what you're talking about, And now keep in mind, she's got this deacon there. She's got some extremely kind of strict looking representative of the Christian church there who kind of looks like really sort of smoke and brimstone or whatever, fire and brimstone. And then you have James Whale, who himself is clearly suspicious of the occult and kind of takes on a little bit of a cheeky approach, at least. But even during the interview earlier, at some points of this particular 1980s interview, he even looks straight into Patricia's eyes and says, okay, let's calm down here. It just gets so fired up.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to see her strong-willed, eloquent, elegant, autonomous presence rise to the occasion and hold her ground very strongly and sophisticatedly, if there's such a word, with sophistication. And she is a true high priestess in her composure and presence. It's very profound and inspiring to watch her take on the tsunami of discrimination and misconception and just hold her ground.
Yeah, it's when it comes to the craft, there is that distinction where we can say Wicca, we can say the craft, but it does seem like there's more than one thing going on. So it is kind of difficult to put it all under the same umbrella, it seems like.
Oh, absolutely. Witchcraft has an extremely diverse and, multidimensional presence on the earth since the dawn of time. In every culture, in every group of peoples. It was particularly important what Gerald accomplished because, at least in England, because he helped to facilitate the rebirth of a consciousness that was in secrecy and lying, behind the forest for a very long time. And it seemed almost prescient for him to write. He wrote High Magick's Aid under a pen name Skyer. And it was in this particular manual that he revealed some of the more secret rites, the forbidden, you can't speak of these things, but because he was under a pen name, he hid behind that to reveal. And he couched it like it was fiction. So this is how he got around. Such a Gemini. He was a true Gemini. He really created bridges as a psychopomp between the old and new worlds. So it was very powerful to have Patricia and Arnold Crowther continue that into not only with their own writing, but then further into radio and then further into television. Now, during one of these interviews that was recorded for the A Spell of Witchcraft series in 1971, Patricia speaks of a particularly deep and occult experience that she had educating people about out-of-body experiences. And she said that it happened in an extremely, in her words, an unlikely situation, in particular in her visit to the dentist, where she was put under through gas and apparently was struck by, she had this way of visiting the dentist many times, so this wasn't an unusual practice, but this one particular time she said that she was seized by this oppressive feeling squeezing her cranium that was followed by this like an intense heavy in weight that at some point gave way, that she broke through and found herself as a disembodied soul traversing the cosmos, outer space. And she could feel her consciousness, she could feel her being. She felt this incredible wave of joy overcome her, and she was just like, what is going on here? She realized she, although still alive, was not in the dentist's chair anymore. And this whole trance, I guess, this cosmic trance went on for a long time until she started hearing a voice saying, you must return to your body, you must. And she was reluctant to. But she had that classic sort of like, when you, I'm not certain if you've ever had experiences, any out-of-body experiences.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
I definitely have had them myself. Even from a very young age, as I've mentioned before, where I used to walk in my sleep until I was about 21. So during a meditation into my 20s, I did have that experience of when you break out of your body with an umbilical cord and you're looking down on your seated body, realizing that your body is up against the ceiling. So I've had that experience. So when she was describing this, I'm like, I know what this is. I know what this is. Eventually she did return to her body, and the doctors and nurses were like, we thought we lost you. Apparently she was gone for a very long time, but it was like her intimate understanding of life beyond this conscious world that we exist in. So I found that story really fascinating.
Yeah.
When she spoke of that. So with that, it deepened her public service role, very much as Madame Melba had predicted, because she started taking on experiences where she would help people with spells. She would exorcise people's homes of ghosts. She would cast people's astrological charts and read their tarot. So she became like this, kind of like the cunning woman, the cunning woman that serves her community on a multidimensional level.
I think I remember seeing something, watching some of these videos on her where she had past life regression.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's a good place to go back to. So here they are, Patricia and Arnold Crowther are doing their thing. I guess at some point during their union, she felt compelled to have some sessions with a hypnotist. And several sessions happened without anything coming to pass. But at one point, during one of the sessions, I remember this, thank you for reminding me. At one of the sessions, she did break through to like the 17th century. It was like at the year was 1670 or something like that, where suddenly her voice changed under hypnosis, and she had the voice of like a crone. And she was going on about living with her hen and her cat and her frog and her duck, and she kept referring to herself as Polly, like not polyamorous. I mean, her name is Polly. Just to clarify there, her name was Polly in this past life. But she, in this embodiment, in this state, was declaring how people would come to her as the local cunning woman and would ask her to do services for her, spell casting, etc. And there was this one soundbite that I really enjoyed of her saying in this crone's voice, "I despise these people. They just come and use me and slander me and call me a witch, but here they come again, asking for their spells."
She does such a good voice for that, too.
I know. So it was really, her beef with humanity was this incessant need to be helped with spells. Spells in particular that revolved around love spells. And there would be people that would come crying to her, "Oh, I need a spell from you to bring my lover back," that sort of thing. And in one of the spells that was given through Patricia's voice, this crone declares, "Take the blood of a virgin and a hair from your husband's head and cook it together with some sort of stew. Mix it well, concentrating on your desire." And to the client she declared, "Recite the following chant. Get thee a man, get thee a maid, mix it up well and be not afraid. This you will get, this you will eat, mix it with bread and mix it with meat." It sounds like the Brothers Grimm, or like, it kind of reminds me of like Hans Christian Andersen, with Hansel and Gretel going into the forest. So it's charming, but you can imagine what that kind of program, like what kind of impact that program had on people listening. Like, you see, it is the work of the devil, you see,
I was listening to an interview with a gentleman who was, I think he ended up being he didn't like to call himself the head of the craft or whatever, because I guess the craft doesn't seem to be structured that way.
Various incarnations of witchcraft, whether they be traditional, whatever somebody identifies as, people self-initiating, that's also something that evolves with the 60s. Well, before that, of course, but that became a conscious thing for people that they had no idea about. But within the craft, it is very much like, witchcraft is like, it attracts a herd of cats. Everyone has complete respect for each other's autonomy. Everyone is their own agent and has a direct pipeline to source. We are the embodiments of the divine. We are the microcosm of the macrocosm, etc. So there is a very strong urge to lead experiences in an egalitarian manner. There are some people that are more traditional with some hierarchies, like when you can become a neophyte and graduate up to an initiated witch, and then go up to priestess, and then further on into the higher degrees, as Wicca has, first, second, and third degree. But not all traditions operate the same. You have an amazing book by Margot Adler that I recommend people read if they have not read it, called Drawing Down the Moon. I read that book when I was 21, and it has an absolutely fascinating cross-section of occult traditions and paths and ways of leading one's witchy life. Margot Adler herself, who I met, was a profound high priestess. She was the daughter of the famous, granddaughter of the famous psychologist. I'm sidetracking here, but her book really does show the diversity of witchcraft and how it manifested in the 20th century. So I could see somebody, this individual you're speaking of, being reluctant to identify as a...
It's funny because it does sound... It's amazing to me that there can be some animosity between Wiccans and Thelemites. I don't think there's animosity from Thelemites. There might be snobbery because Thelemites are certainly capable of being snobs, but because it just seems like there's a lot of that, that individuality and the respect for the individual path and that sort of thing going on.
Yeah, well, this is why there's so much emphasis placed on like the Patricia Crowthers of the world that stand up and present sound educational options for folks to do their own research and to, seek out what path is sound for their own evolution spiritually.
I mean, there's even a quote from Patricia that stuck out to me and sounds so, resonant with like the Book of the Law, for instance, and that sort of thing, which is, "We must not forget in the New Age, the ruler of Aquarius is none other than the star goddess, whose white hand even now beckons the children of the earth to become children of the stars."
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah.
So you see occult paths are merely divided in an illusory way by semantics.
For love's sake, so to speak.
But yeah, here we are. 70s are unfolding. And then on the 1st of May, 1974, sadly, Patricia loses Arnold Crowther because he passes away. And she naturally would have a very deep level of grief and carrying an intense amount of responsibility for the Sheffield Coven. But she forged forward. She continued the work of herself and Arnold for the betterment of humanity. She continued touring the country. She continued doing various television and radio interviews. Like that infamous James Whale 1980s clip that we got to see. And then when she hit 70, during one of her deep meditations with her magical group, she received like a sort of message from the cosmos sort of thing, where she heard a voice saying that it was time for her to identify herself as the grandmother of the modern craft of the wise. So it's moving into the crowndom now, with her teachings. And she, unto this day, continues this path of teaching. She was, as well as Doreen Valiente and Eleanor Bone, recognized for their contributions as founding members of the modern rebirth of witchcraft, at least in Europe. And in, I think, 2014, there was an official creation of the Doreen Valiente Foundation. Basically like a museum of education of sorts, in order to document this profound series of achievements in the, after the 20th century with these pioneering voices of the ancient craft of the wise.
Yeah, I think it was the person I was referring to before, the gentleman was actually, it was an interview with him, and Dorothy had willed her possessions to him to be the founder, and which she basically told him, "I know you'll do what's right with this material," and the material was all kinds of really important kind of artifacts.
Oh, yes, like
you know?
artifacts that were used in rituals when Doreen was ritualing with Gerald.
Yeah, there was some of Gerald Gardner's, in fact, an early book of shadows, I think.
That's correct, yes.
And there was I think it was a knife, he said, or a athame or whatnot, that originally belonged to Aleister Crowley.
Oh, no way.
And a couple of these, well, actually not just a couple, but like a whole slew of stuff.
He had a lot of athames, he had a lot of wands, all sorts of paraphernalia. And of course the Museum of Witchcraft on the Isle of Man, which I would absolutely love to go visit one day.
Yeah.
That still to this day exists.
Yeah, that sounds really fascinating. And I like the fact, the way he was putting it was that there was a lot of people sort of approaching him about buying some of those things. And the more they would approach him about it, the more he kind of knew that, no, that's not the right thing to do. This stuff should stay together and it shouldn't be used for, profit or that sort of thing.
A very wise decision. Yes, absolutely.
So, yeah.
So that is the magic of Patricia Crowther. She continues to be quite an inspirational figurehead for those seeking the wisdom of ancient times.
Yeah, still with us to this day. It'd be nice to see if she's, still able to keep active and that sort of thing. I mean, she's got to be must have just turned 96, I suppose.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so.
She definitely can be seen as an official elder of the teachings, carrying forth the tradition as it came to be reborn, I guess. It never did leave. These are ancient paths, traditions, rites, as you know, connected to the sacred mysteries that humanity has been observing since its presence on this planet, and it's grappling with the ancient portals of our magical existence, which brings me full circle back to Egypt. So when I think of like the Gerald Gardners, the Patricias, that Doreen Valientes, etc., and their deep dive into the mysteries, it always goes back to the same magical themes that we see through many occult traditions. What is the mystery of our existence here? What is our connection to the macrocosm? What lies beyond the door of death? What lies behind us in past lives? Where is the heart of the sacred? And also the seeking of truth and the very deep sacred truth of love being the foundation of all of existence. So you see these themes and like everything from Egypt to the Western esoteric tradition to, just plug in said tradition and I'm sure there will be threads that come up.
Yeah, it's just that
consistency,
that human heritage, and I think there's that same gentleman I referred to, I can't remember his name, but
we're gonna have to do a a footnote or something.
Yeah, they'll just drop in a little bing bing, and then But no, he was in the course of this interview, I think he had brought up Dorothy Valiente because of the fact that was when he first decided to honor someone and have a day honoring somebody important. And so I suppose when they decided to do a day honoring Patricia Crowther, they ended up basically doing it while she was still with us.
Which is so great.
Yeah.
It's so great.
So if you can get on YouTube and check it out, there's a video of that day for her, but it's kind of just little... Yeah,
it's a little choppy and grainy, but it's good that it exists.
Yeah, and it does have a portion wherein Patricia herself is reciting something, and she's clearly got it completely memorized and is very passionate.
It's so intense.
It's great. It's very impressive, and definitely worth checking out.
Yeah, so she would have had an incredibly charismatic presence in ritual, given her theater background. And that's the thing too, is that not only did Patricia and Arnold write these books, but they penned new songs and new rites to contribute to the Gardnerian tradition. They contributed their own creative homage to the divine in the form of song and poetry and ritual. So it's very inspiring to have that level of devotion to the path before you, at least while one of them is still alive.
Yeah.
So, although we are eternal, so hail to Arnold, still present.
That was a big part of her recitation involved,
Yes.
the idea of reincarnation.
Absolutely.
And the passage after death. And
Yes.
that still being a form of life.
Yes, and she's a firecracker. I really like her. I really like her potent devotion is the word that keeps coming up. True devotion to the goddess.
Well, thank you very much, Rosemary, for joining me once again. It's good to have you back.
Yes, thank you.
As much as Egypt would like to keep you.
I will return once again. But I definitely urge anyone who's interested to follow further to hear some of those charming episodes of A Spell of Witchcraft, and perhaps to navigate the various incarnations through the 12 houses of the zodiac that Patricia offers.
I listened to the Aquarius one, and it was...
Oh, did you?
Yeah, it's a really great little guided meditation, so very powerful.
Wonderful.
Well, thanks again, and 93.
93.
Thanks for listening. Find us online at torontothelema.org. Watch for events on Meetup and the usual social media spots, and join us again in the darkly splendid abode.